The gunshot that killed Jacob Morrison didn't echo through the canyon the way folks said it would in the dime novels. And that was when Brennan Nash knew the stories were all lies. He'd been 23 years old, standing in the dust of Deadwood, South Dakota, watching his older brother bleed out over a card game gone wrong. And in that moment, every dream he'd ever harbored about making something of himself in this God-forsaken territory died right alongside Jake. That had been 5 years ago, and Brennan hadn't allowed himself to hope for much of anything since then. He worked his small ranch outside Wallace, Idaho, with the mechanical efficiency of a man who'd forgotten why he'd wanted land in the first place, rising before dawn to tend cattle that would eventually be sold to pay debts, collapsing into a hard bed each night without bothering to imagine tomorrow might be different from today. The spring of 1882 arrived wet and cold, turning the roads into rivers of mud that made travel nearly impossible, which was why Brennan almost didn't go into town that Thursday morning. His supplies were low, but not desperately so, and the thought of slogging through the muck held little appeal. Something pushed him forward, though, some restless feeling he couldn't name, and he saddled his mare and made the slow journey into Wallace just as the sun burned through the morning fog. The town was busier than usual. Folks gathered near the general store in tight clusters, their voices carrying that particular pitch of excitement mixed with scandal that meant something interesting had happened. Stage got held up about 10 miles south, old Henry Pritchard announced when Brennan approached. Driver managed to outrun them bandits, but one of the passengers took a tumble when the coach hit that bad stretch near Clement Creek. Young woman, traveling alone if you can believe it. Brennan couldn't particularly believe it, because women didn't travel alone through Idaho territory in 1882, not unless they were running from something or had nowhere else to go. He collected his supplies with half an ear turned toward the gossip, learning that the woman had been brought to Doc Wheeler's office with a badly twisted ankle and possible concussion, that she'd been carrying nothing but a single carpet bag and a book of poetry, that she'd given her name as Amelia Abbott, and claimed to be headed to Wallace to take up a position as a schoolteacher. "We don't have a school," Brennan found himself saying, though he hadn't meant to join the conversation. "That's what I told her," Doc Wheeler said, appearing in the doorway of his office with his sleeves rolled up and a concerned expression on his weathered face. "But she's insisting that's why she came all this way from Boston. Got some letter supposedly from the town council offering her the position. Only problem is, we haven't had a town council in 2 years, not since Mayor Jennings passed." The mystery deepened throughout the day, and despite his better judgment, Brennan found himself lingering in town longer than necessary. By afternoon, the sheriff had determined that the letter Miss Abbott carried was indeed a forgery, likely the work of some con man back east who'd been collecting money from desperate women by promising them positions that didn't exist. It was a cruel trick, leaving her stranded in a territory she didn't know with no means of returning home and no job waiting for her. The women of Wallace clucked sympathetically and brought food to the boarding house where she'd been moved, while the men shook their heads and muttered about the wickedness of the world. Brennan told himself he was only curious when he knocked on the boarding house door that evening. Mrs. Chen, who ran the establishment with firm kindness, looked at him with knowing eyes that made him uncomfortable. "She's in the parlor," was all she said, stepping aside to let him enter. The woman sitting by the window had auburn hair that caught the last rays of sunlight, turning it to burnished copper, and even with her foot propped up and a bruise darkening her left temple, she possessed a kind of quiet dignity that made Brennan feel suddenly aware of the dust on his boots and the rough state of his clothes. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes were the color of sage after rain, gray-green and impossibly clear. "I heard what happened," Brennan said, which was possibly the stupidest opening he could have chosen. "I mean about the letter, the false letter." "Yes, it seems I've been thoroughly fooled," Amelia said, and her voice carried the crisp accent of educated Boston society, so out of place in this rough mining town that Brennan almost smiled. "I sold everything I owned to make this journey. My mother's china, my father's books, even the piano that had been in our family for 3 generations. All to pay for passage west to a position that never existed." "That's a hard blow," Brennan said, and meant it. He knew something about having dreams crushed, about sacrificing for futures that never came. "The hardest part is knowing I have nowhere to go back to," Amelia continued, her gaze returning to the window. "My father died last year, leaving nothing but debts. I'd been working as a governess, but the family was moving to Europe and didn't need me anymore. When that letter arrived, it seemed like providence. A chance to start fresh, to build something meaningful in a new place. I should have known it was too perfect to be real." Brennan pulled up a chair without asking permission, something in her story resonating with his own losses. "What will you do?" "I don't know," she admitted, and for the first time he saw fear flicker across her composed features. "Mrs. Chen has kindly offered to let me stay here for a week without charge, but after that, I'll need to find work or figure out how to earn enough for passage back east, though I'm not sure what awaits me there either." They talked as the sun set and Mrs. Chen brought tea, and Brennan found himself telling her about his ranch, about the long, lonely days and the work that never seemed to end. He didn't mention Jacob, wasn't ready to open that wound, but he spoke about the land itself with something approaching the passion he'd once felt for it. Amelia listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually thinking about what he said rather than just being polite. "It sounds beautiful," she said when he described the way the mountains looked at dawn, purple and gold against an endless sky. "Lonely, but beautiful." "Lonely," he agreed, and the word hung between them with unexpected weight. He returned the next day, telling himself he was just being neighborly, that anyone would check on an injured stranger. Amelia's ankle was improving, but she still couldn't walk without pain, and the bruise on her temple had darkened to an ugly purple-black. She'd spent the morning writing letters to everyone she could think of back east who might be able to offer assistance or employment, but her expression suggested she held little hope for replies. "The women here have been very kind," she told him. "Mrs. Patterson brought enough food for a week, and Miss Sarah offered to teach me how to do laundry the way they do it out here, which apparently is quite different from Boston methods. They're trying to help, I know, but I can see the pity in their eyes. Poor Miss Abbott, their thinking, foolish Eastern girl who got taken in by a con man." "I don't think you're foolish," Brennan said. "I think you were brave, coming all this way alone, ready to build something new. That takes courage." She looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected such words from a rough rancher. "Thank you. That may be the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time." Over the following days, Brennan found excuses to come to town more often than his work really required. He told himself he was just checking on her progress, being a good neighbor, but the truth was that talking to Amelia made him feel something he'd thought long dead. She was smart and funny, with a sharp wit that could catch him off guard, and she listened to him in a way that made him want to share things he'd kept locked away for years. He found himself mentioning Jacob one afternoon, talking about how his brother had always been the dreamer while Brennan had been the practical one, and how losing him had felt like losing his own ability to imagine a better future. "But you kept going," Amelia said softly. You kept working your land, building your ranch. That's not giving up, isn't it? Brennan asked. When you're just going through the motions without really believing in what you're doing. I think sometimes going through the motions is all we can manage, she replied. And maybe that's enough to keep us alive until we find a reason to really live again. Her words stayed with him as he rode back to his ranch that evening, echoing in his mind as he completed his chores and sat alone at his rough-hewn table, eating a cold dinner. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence more oppressive, and he found himself thinking about what it would be like to have someone to talk to at the end of the day, to share meals with, to build something alongside. By the end of her first week in Wallace, Amelia's ankle had healed enough for her to walk with only a slight limp, and she'd begun taking on odd jobs around town to earn her keep. She mended clothes for Mrs. Patterson, helped organize inventory at the general store, and gave impromptu reading lessons to some of the miners' children in the boarding house parlor. Brennan watched her navigate this rough frontier town with the same dignity she'd shown from the beginning, never complaining about the dramatic change in her circumstances, never acting as though the work was beneath her. "You're good with those kids," he observed one afternoon, having arrived just as she finished a lesson with 3 young boys who could barely sit still. "I enjoy it," Amelia said, and he could see she meant it. "Back in Boston, I taught the children of wealthy families who saw education as just another social accomplishment. These children are hungry to learn, eager for every scrap of knowledge. It makes the teaching feel meaningful." "You should start that school for real," Brennan said, the idea forming as he spoke. "Not the fake one from the letter, but an actual school. Wallace needs one, has needed one for years. Most of these kids can barely read or write because their parents are too busy working to teach them." "With what money?" Amelia asked practically. "Where would I hold classes? Who would pay my salary?" "The families would contribute what they could," Brennan said, thinking it through. "Maybe not much, but something. As for a building, there's that old church at the edge of town that hasn't been used since the congregation built the new one. It would need work, but it's structurally sound. And as for salary—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "I could help." "Not charity," he added quickly when he saw her expression. "An investment in the community. My ranch does well enough." That last part was only somewhat true. His ranch did adequately, but not so well that he could easily spare the money. Still, as he looked at Amelia's face, saw the hope kindling in her eyes, he knew he'd find a way to make it work. They spent the next several days planning, and Brennan discovered that working towards something with Amelia felt entirely different from working alone. She had ideas about curriculum and teaching methods. He knew the families in the area and what they could reasonably contribute. And together, they sketched out a plan that might actually work. The abandoned church needed significant repairs, and Brennan found himself volunteering to handle most of the labor, recruiting a few other men from town to help with the heavier work. "You're spending a lot of time on this," his neighbor Ted Sullivan observed one Saturday as they replaced rotted floorboards in the old church. "Spending a lot of time with that Eastern lady too, from what I hear." Brennan hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "Just helping out." "Sure," Ted said with a knowing grin. "Just helping. That's why you've been in town nearly every day for 2 weeks, looking happier than I've seen you since before Jake died." The words struck deeper than Ted probably intended, and that night Brennan lay awake thinking about what his neighbor had said. He was happier, he realized. For the first time in 5 years, he was waking up with something to look forward to, making plans that stretched beyond just getting through the day. And it was all because of Amelia, because of the way she made him want to believe in possibilities again, made him want to build something that mattered. The realization terrified him. Caring about something, about someone, meant opening himself up to loss again, and he wasn't sure he could survive another Jacob-sized hole in his life. But even as he tried to talk himself into pulling back, into maintaining distance, he knew it was too late. Amelia had already worked her way into his thoughts, his days, his carefully constructed walls. Spring turned to early summer, and the school began to take shape. The church had been cleaned and repaired, desks constructed from salvaged lumber, and Amelia had used some of her earnings to order primers and slates from the supplier in Coeur d'Alene. The town had embraced the project with surprising enthusiasm, and 12 families had committed to sending their children and contributing what they could toward Amelia's salary. It wouldn't make her rich, but it would be enough to live on modestly. "I can't believe this is really happening," Amelia said one evening as she and Brennan stood in the transformed church, now recognizable as a proper schoolroom. "6 weeks ago I was injured and stranded and terrified, and now I have a purpose, a place, a future. I never expected." She trailed off, looking at him with an expression that made his heart race. "Never expected what?" Brennan asked, though he thought he might know. "Never expected to be grateful for that forged letter," she said softly. "If it had been real, I would have come to Wallace, taught at an established school, probably kept to myself. I wouldn't have met you, wouldn't have built this with you. The worst thing that ever happened to me led me to the best thing." Brennan closed the distance between them without conscious thought, reaching out to tuck a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Amelia," he said, and her name felt like a prayer, like hope, like everything he'd stopped letting himself want. "Yes," she whispered. "I stopped dreaming a long time ago," he said, the words coming from somewhere deep and honest. "After my brother died, I couldn't see the point. Every dream felt like setting myself up for disappointment, for more loss. So I stopped looking forward, stopped imagining anything better. But then you arrived, and suddenly I'm dreaming again. Not about some vague better life, but about our life. Together. I'm dreaming about coming home to you, about building something with you, about having a reason to believe in tomorrow." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I'm dreaming too," she confessed. "About a home here, about teaching these children about you. Always about you. Is it crazy that I feel this way after such a short time?" "If it's crazy, then we're both mad," Brennan said. And then he kissed her, soft and careful and full of all the hope he'd thought he'd lost forever. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more real, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "Marry me," Brennan said, the words escaping before he could second-guess them. "I know it's fast, I know we should probably wait, but I don't want to. I've wasted 5 years of my life just existing, and I don't want to waste another day. Marry me, Amelia. Build this life with me." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the very church that had become Amelia's school, with half the town in attendance despite the short notice. Amelia wore a simple blue dress that she'd altered herself, and Brennan had purchased a new shirt for the occasion, and when they spoke their vows, his voice caught on the word forever, because he finally believed in it again. The celebration lasted into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than the small community should have reasonably been able to produce. And through it all, Brennan kept finding himself looking at Amelia in wonder, hardly able to believe this was his life now. Bringing Amelia home to the ranch was its own revelation. He saw the place through her eyes, noticing things he'd stopped seeing long ago. The way the evening light painted the mountains, the wildflowers that bloomed near the creek, the solid craftsmanship of the cabin he'd built with Jacob all those years ago. Amelia walked through each room slowly, taking it all in, and when she turned to him with a smile, he knew she saw not just what was, but what could be. "It needs work," he said apologetically, suddenly aware of how sparse and masculine the space was, how little comfort it offered. "It needs a family," Amelia corrected. "It needs life and laughter and love. It needs us." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Amelia taught school 4 days a week, filling the old church with the sounds of children's voices and growing more confident in her role with each passing day. Brennan continued working the ranch, but now he worked with purpose, expanding the herd, improving the property, building toward a future rather than just maintaining the present. They fell into rhythms together: morning coffee before sunrise, evening walks along the creek, nights wrapped in each other's arms talking about their days and their dreams. "I want to expand the school," Amelia told him one evening in late summer as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "There are families further out who can't send their children because it's too far to travel daily. I was thinking maybe we could start a boarding program, let them stay in town during the week." "That's ambitious," Brennan said, but he was smiling. "Where would they stay, Mrs.?" "Chen mentioned she has extra rooms. If we could guarantee payment, she'd be willing to house them. We'd need to raise more money, though, and I'd need help supervising them outside school hours." "We'll figure it out," Brennan said, pulling her close. "We always do." The first winter of their marriage tested them in ways neither had anticipated. Snow came early and heavy, isolating the ranch for weeks at a time and making the journey to town treacherous. School had to be suspended during the worst storms, and Brennan worried constantly about supplies, about the cattle, about whether they'd make it through to spring. But having Amelia beside him made even the hardest days bearable. She never complained about the cold or the isolation, instead finding ways to make the cabin warm and welcoming, reading aloud by firelight, teaching him the poetry she'd loved back in Boston, making him laugh with stories from her teaching days. "You miss it?" He asked her one particularly brutal January night when the wind howled around the cabin like a living thing. "Miss Boston, miss the life you had." "Not for a moment," Amelia said firmly. "That was never my life, Brennan. I was just living in the margins of other people's lives, taking care of their children, existing in their houses. This is my life. You are my life, and I choose it every single day." Spring of 1883 arrived with dramatic suddenness, the snow melting in rushing torrents that swelled the creek and turned the pastures brilliant green. Amelia resumed teaching with renewed energy, and Brennan threw himself into ranch work, making up for the dormant winter months. They were busy and tired and happier than either had imagined possible, building something together that felt solid and real and lasting. In May, Amelia missed her monthly courses, and by June there was no denying she was pregnant. The news filled Brennan with equal parts joy and terror. He'd never thought much about being a father, had assumed after Jacob died that he'd live out his days alone. Now he was about to be responsible for a tiny life, for raising a child in this harsh territory, and the weight of it sometimes felt crushing. "You're going to be wonderful," Amelia assured him, reading his fears with the ease of long intimacy. "You're patient and kind and strong, and our child will be so lucky to have you as a father." "What if something happens?" Brennan asked, voicing his deepest fear. "What if I lose you? What if I lose the baby? I can't go through that again, Amelia. I can't." "You won't," she said with more certainty than she could possibly possess. "But even if the worst happened, even if something went wrong, you wouldn't be alone. You'd still have people who care about you, still have reasons to keep going. You're stronger than you think." Brennan Nash. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into fall, though Amelia had to stop teaching in October when her condition became too obvious to ignore. The school continued under the supervision of Martha Williams, a widow who'd been assisting Amelia for several months, and Brennan found himself constantly amazed by his wife's ability to plan for every eventuality, to build systems that could function without her direct involvement. Their son was born in early December, during a brief warm spell that made Doc Wheeler's journey to the ranch possible. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Brennan thought his heart would give out from fear. But when he finally heard his child's first cry, when Amelia placed the tiny bundle in his arms, everything else fell away. The baby had Amelia's nose and a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were the deep blue of a mountain lake. "Thomas," Amelia said sleepily. "After your brother, Thomas Jacob Nash." Brennan felt something break open in his chest, some final locked door that had been holding him back from complete joy. "Thomas Jacob," he repeated, looking down at his son. "Welcome to the world, little man. We've been waiting for you." Fatherhood transformed Brennan in ways he couldn't have predicted. He'd expected to love his son, but he hadn't anticipated the fierce protectiveness, the desperate desire to give Thomas every opportunity to build a world worthy of him. When Amelia returned to teaching in the spring of 1884, Brennan often brought Thomas with him on errands to town, the baby strapped to his chest in a carrier Amelia had sewn. The sight of the gruff rancher with an infant became so common that people stopped commenting, though Brennan caught more than one approving smile from the women of Wallace. "You're a natural," Mrs. Chen told him one afternoon when he stopped by to deliver Thomas to Amelia for feeding. Not many men would take to fatherhood so completely. "He's my son," Brennan said simply. "Where else would I want to be?" The school continued to grow and thrive, and Amelia's boarding program became a reality when 3 families from the outlying areas committed to sending their children. Mrs. Chen housed them during the week for a modest fee, and Amelia spent her evenings helping them with homework and making sure they were cared for. It was exhausting work, balancing teaching and motherhood and her expanded responsibilities, but Amelia seemed to bloom under the pressure, finding reserves of energy Brennan didn't know she possessed. The ranch prospered too. Brennan had expanded the herd significantly, and his cattle were developing a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far as Spokane. He hired a young hand named Charlie to help with the daily work, which freed up more of his time to spend with Amelia and Thomas. They were building something substantial, something that would last, and for the first time since Jacob's death, Brennan could look at his land and feel pride rather than just grim determination. Thomas grew from infant to toddler with alarming speed, walking at 10 months and speaking in full sentences by age 2. He had his mother's intelligence and his father's quiet stubbornness, and watching him explore the world with fearless curiosity made Brennan's heart ache with love. On Thomas's 2nd birthday, as they celebrated with cake and presents and half the town in attendance, Brennan found a quiet moment with Amelia on the porch. "You remember what you said that first week?" he asked her. "About how going through the motions is sometimes all we can manage, until we find a reason to really live again." "I remember," Amelia said, leaning against him. "You became my reason," Brennan said. "You and Thomas and this life we've built. I spent 5 years just existing, and then you arrived and everything changed. You made me want to dream again, made me believe in the future again. We saved each other," Amelia said softly. "I was lost and alone and terrified, and you gave me a home, a purpose, a family. We were both broken in our own ways, and somehow we fit together perfectly." In the summer of 1885, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again, and this time Brennan greeted the news with joy rather than fear. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and their daughter was born in February of 1886, arriving so quickly that Doc Wheeler barely made it in time. They named her Clara Rose, and she had Amelia's auburn hair and Brennan's brown eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Thomas adored his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bottle feeding. At 3 years old, he took his role as big brother seriously, constantly checking on Clara and reporting to his parents about her every move. Watching his children together, seeing the family they were becoming, Brennan sometimes had to pause and remember that this was real, that this was his life now. The school had become such an integral part of Wallace that when the territorial government sent an inspector in 1886, he was impressed enough to recommend official funding. Amelia received a proper salary from the Territorial Education Fund, and money was allocated for books and supplies. The little school in the converted church was recognized as a model for rural education, and Amelia was asked to speak at a territorial education conference in Boise, though she declined due to Clara's infancy. "You should go," Brennan told her. "Your mother and I can manage for a few days, and this is important. You've built something remarkable, and people should hear about it." "Maybe next year," Amelia said. "Right now, I want to be here with you and the children. The school will still be here when I'm ready." The years flowed past with increasing speed. Thomas started school at 5, sitting in his mother's classroom and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Clara grew into a spirited toddler who kept everyone on their toes with her adventurous nature and complete lack of fear. The ranch continued to expand and prosper, and Brennan hired 2 more hands to help manage the growing operation. They built an addition onto the cabin, adding more bedrooms and a proper dining room, transforming it from a bachelor's rough shelter into a real family home. In 1888, when Thomas was 6 and Clara was 2, Amelia was offered the position of Territorial Education Supervisor, a role that would require moving to Boise and giving up the school. She turned it down without even discussing it with Brennan first. "This is our home," she said when he asked about it. "These are our people, our community. I'm not interested in bureaucratic positions in the territorial capital. I want to be here, teaching these children, raising our family, building this life with you." "You could do so much good in that position," Brennan said, though he was secretly relieved by her decision. "You could influence education policy across the entire territory." "I can do good right here," Amelia replied. "I can teach children who might otherwise never learn to read. I can give them opportunities they wouldn't have elsewhere. That's enough for me. More than enough." That summer, Ted Sullivan's oldest son, barely 16, was caught stealing cattle from a neighboring ranch. The boy faced serious jail time, possibly even hanging depending on how harsh the judge felt, and Ted was desperate. Brennan found himself remembering Jacob, remembering how his brother had made one stupid mistake in a card game and paid for it with his life. He spoke on young Michael's behalf at the hearing, vouching for the family and offering to take the boy on as a ranch hand where he could be supervised and kept busy with honest work. The judge agreed to probation under Brennan's supervision, and Michael came to work at the ranch with a chip on his shoulder and resentment in his eyes. It took months of patient work, of treating him with respect and trust even when he didn't deserve it, but gradually, Michael began to change. He worked hard, learned the ranching trade, and eventually became one of Brennan's most reliable hands. Ted cried when he thanked Brennan, and the incident deepened the bonds of community in Wallace, creating ripples of goodwill that spread through the small town. "You saved that boy," Amelia told him one night after Michael had been with them for a year. "You gave him a second chance when no one else would." "Someone should have given Jake a second chance," Brennan said quietly. "He made a mistake, but he wasn't a bad person. He deserved better than dying in the dust over a card game." "So you're giving other people what your brother never got," Amelia said. "That's beautiful, Brennan. That's healing." In the spring of 1890, Amelia gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Samuel Henry. At 33 and 31, respectively, Brennan and Amelia felt like old hands at parenthood now, approaching Samuel's arrival with calm confidence, rather than the panic that had accompanied Thomas. Their oldest was 8 now, and already showing signs of his father's talent with animals and land, while Clara at 4 was reading at a level far beyond her years, clearly inheriting her mother's academic gifts. The ranch had grown to nearly 500 acres, one of the most successful operations in the region, and Brennan employed 6 full-time hands plus seasonal workers during busy periods. He'd expanded into horse breeding alongside cattle, and his stock was in high demand throughout the territory. The money they made was reinvested partly into the ranch and partly into the community, funding improvements to the school and helping families in need. Wallace itself had grown and changed over the years. Idaho had achieved statehood in 1890, bringing new attention and resources to the region. The mining industry continued to boom, bringing more families and more children who needed education. Amelia's school now served over 40 students ranging from age 5 to 15, and she'd trained 3 assistant teachers to help manage the growing enrollment. "We should build a proper schoolhouse," Brennan suggested one evening as they reviewed the enrollment numbers. "The old church has served well, but it's bursting at the seams. We could build something larger, more modern, with separate classrooms for different age groups." "That would cost a fortune," Amelia said practically. "We have a fortune," Brennan replied. "Or near enough. The ranch is doing well, the state might contribute, and I bet we could raise money from the community. You've given so much to this town, Amelia. Let us give something back." The project consumed the next 2 years. Brennan coordinated the fundraising and construction, while Amelia designed the layout and planned how the space would be used. The new Wallace School opened in September of 1892, a 2-story building with 4 classrooms, a library, and a small auditorium for community gatherings. It was the finest building in town, and at the dedication ceremony, the mayor specifically recognized Amelia's 10 years of service to the community's children. "This town was rough and raw when you arrived," Mayor Richardson said. "You came here by accident, stranded and injured with no reason to stay. But you chose to build something here, and in doing so, you helped build us. You've taught our children, yes, but you've also taught us the value of education, of community, of investing in the future. This building stands as a testament to your vision and dedication." Brennan watched his wife accept the recognition with characteristic grace, saw the tears in her eyes as she looked at what they'd built together, and felt his own throat tighten with emotion. 12 years ago, he'd been a man without dreams, going through the motions of life without real purpose or hope. Then Amelia had stumbled into his world, injured and lost, and everything had changed. She'd given him back his ability to imagine a future, to work towards something meaningful, to love without fear of loss. Their life together wasn't perfect. There were hard seasons when the cattle didn't thrive, difficult years when money was tight, conflicts and disagreements that every marriage faces. But through it all, they held onto each other and the dreams they'd built together. They raised their children with love and clear expectations, teaching Thomas and Clara and Samuel about hard work and integrity, and the importance of community. They continued to invest in Wallace, helping it grow from a rough mining camp into a proper town with schools and churches and civic institutions. Thomas went off to college in 1897, the first in either family to receive higher education, and returned with a degree in agriculture and new ideas about ranch management. He took over more of the day-to-day operations, implementing modern techniques while respecting the foundations his father had laid. Clara followed her mother into teaching, though she eventually moved to Spokane to take a position at a larger school. Samuel inherited his father's quieter nature and stayed close to home, working the ranch and eventually marrying a local girl named Elizabeth, who'd been one of his mother's students. The new century arrived with fanfare and celebration, and Brennan and Amelia rang in 1900 surrounded by family and friends, their children grown or nearly so, their hair touched with gray but their love as strong as ever. They'd been married for 18 years, together for nearly 19, and Brennan still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "What are you thinking?" Amelia asked him as they stood on their porch watching the fireworks someone had brought from Spokane light up the night sky. "I'm thinking about that forged letter," Brennan said. "About the worst day of your life bringing you here to me, to this life we've built. I'm thinking about how I'd given up on dreaming, on hoping for anything better, and then you appeared and everything changed." "We changed together," Amelia corrected, leaning into his embrace. "You saved me as much as I saved you. You gave me a home when I had none, a purpose when I'd lost mine, love when I'd stopped believing in it." "I dreamed of a better life when I was young," Brennan said. "Before Jake died, I had all these grand plans for what I'd build, what I'd become. After I lost him, those dreams seemed foolish and I stopped letting myself want things. But then you arrived, and I didn't start dreaming of a better life. I started dreaming of our life together, and that turned out to be better than anything I'd imagined before." "Our life together," Amelia repeated softly. "I like the sound of that. Past, present, and future, all woven together. All the years behind us and all the years ahead, building something that lasts." They stood together watching the celebration, this man who'd stopped dreaming and this woman who'd been stranded far from home, both of them finding in each other something they'd stopped believing existed. Their children laughed with friends nearby, their grandchildren would come in time, and the community they'd helped build thrived around them. The ranch stretched out in the darkness, solid and prosperous, and the school stood as a monument to what could be accomplished through dedication and love. In 1905, at ages 48 and 46, Brennan and Amelia became grandparents when Thomas and his wife welcomed a daughter. Holding the tiny girl, Brennan was transported back to that cold December night when Thomas had been born, remembering his terror and wonder. Now watching his son experience those same emotions, seeing the circle complete itself, he felt a profound sense of peace and accomplishment. "We did well," he told Amelia that night as they lay in bed in the home they'd expanded and improved over the years. "Look at what we built. Not just the ranch or the school, but this family, these relationships, this community. We did something that matters." "We did," Amelia agreed, "and we're not done yet. There's still so much more to do, so many more years to share together." She was right. They had more years ahead of them. Years of watching their grandchildren grow, of continuing to improve the ranch and support the school, of deepening the bonds of community in Wallace. They faced challenges and changes, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, but they faced them together, united by the love that had saved them both. The school Amelia founded continued long after she retired from active teaching in 1908, becoming one of the most respected educational institutions in northern Idaho. The ranch Brennan built became a multi-generational family operation, employing dozens and supporting the local economy for decades. But their real legacy was less tangible and more profound. The way they'd shown a rough frontier town the value of education and community. The way they'd proved that even the worst circumstances could lead to beautiful outcomes. The way they'd loved each other through everything life threw at them. In the summer of 1910, celebrating their 28th wedding anniversary, Brennan and Amelia took a rare trip alone, riding out to the place where the old church had stood, now replaced by the larger school building but still sacred ground in their memories. They walked hand in hand through the space where they'd first really talked, where they'd planned the school together, where they'd been married. "This is where it all began," Amelia said. "Where we started building our life together." "No," Brennan corrected gently. "It began the moment you arrived in Wallace, injured and lost and trying to be brave. It began when I walked into Mrs. Chen's boarding house and saw you sitting by the window. That's when I started dreaming again, when I started believing in possibilities." "Then I'm grateful for that forged letter," Amelia said. "I'm grateful for the con man who sent me here, grateful for the stage holdup and my injured ankle and every misfortune that brought me to this place, to you. I wouldn't change a single moment of it." "Neither would I," Brennan said, and kissed her there in the shadow of the school they'd built together, the school that had sparked their partnership and their love. They lived many more years together, watching their children build their own families, seeing their grandchildren grow and thrive, continuing to contribute to the community they loved. Brennan eventually passed the ranch to Thomas and Samuel, trusting them to carry on what he'd started. Amelia saw the school she founded grow into a full academy offering education through high school level, providing opportunities to children throughout the region. Their love story became legend in Wallace, the tale of the stranded schoolteacher and the lonely rancher who'd saved each other, who'd built something beautiful from the ruins of their separate losses. People told the story to illustrate the unpredictable nature of fate, the way tragedy could lead to triumph, the power of choosing hope even when circumstances seemed hopeless. On quiet evenings, long after the children were grown and their hair had gone fully white, Brennan and Amelia would sit on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. They'd hold hands the way they had since the beginning, finding comfort in the familiar weight of each other's presence. Sometimes they talked about the past, remembering the struggles and triumphs of their years together. Sometimes they talked about the present, discussing their children and grandchildren and the ever-changing community. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, needing no words to communicate the depth of their connection. "I love you," Brennan would say, the words never losing their power even after being spoken thousands of times over decades. "I love you too," Amelia would reply. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after, just like I promised." They'd built a life together from nothing, two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other. They'd taken a forged letter and a chance encounter and transformed it into something lasting and beautiful, a love story that would echo through generations. And when people asked the secret to their long and happy marriage, they gave the same answer every time. "We kept dreaming together," Brennan would say. "Even when circumstances were difficult, even when the future seemed uncertain, we kept imagining what we could build together and then working to make it real. We chose each other," Amelia would add. "Every single day through everything, we chose each other and our life together." That's what made the difference. And that was the truth of it, the simple, profound reality of their love. Brennan had stopped dreaming of a better life after his brother's death, resigned himself to just existing rather than truly living. Then Amelia had arrived, stranded and scared and trying to be brave, and he'd started dreaming again. Not vague dreams of some undefined better future, but specific dreams of their life together, of building something meaningful alongside her, of having a partner to face whatever came. Those dreams had sustained them through 28 years of marriage and counting, through births and deaths, triumphs and setbacks, ordinary days and extraordinary moments. They'd raised 3 children who became good people, contributed to a community that flourished, built a legacy that would outlast them. But more than any external achievement, they'd built a love that was solid and true, a partnership based on respect and trust and genuine affection. As the years advanced and they grew older together, their love only deepened, acquiring layers of shared history and mutual understanding that young love couldn't possess. They knew each other's stories and scars, strengths and weaknesses, dreams and fears. They'd seen each other at their best and worst, in health and sickness, prosperity and struggle, and chosen to stay together through all of it. Eventually, as all stories must, theirs would reach its natural conclusion. But they faced even that final chapter without fear, secure in the knowledge that they'd lived fully, loved deeply, and built something beautiful together. They'd transformed separate tragedies into shared joy, taken broken dreams and forged them into reality, proved that it's never too late to hope, never too late to love, never too late to start dreaming again. And in the end, that was their true legacy, more valuable than land or buildings or wealth. They'd shown everyone who knew them that love could heal, that partnership could transform, that 2 people working together could accomplish remarkable things. They'd proved that the worst day of your life might actually be the beginning of your best life, that getting lost sometimes means finding exactly where you need to be. Brennan Nash had stopped dreaming of a better life, resigned to loneliness and loss. Then Amelia Abbott arrived, and he started dreaming of their life together. And those dreams, nurtured and protected and built upon every single day, became a reality more beautiful than either of them could have imagined.